Hello, friends. Welcome to another episode of Big Al's Rockin' Podcast. I had to take a couple of weeks off. Got some fun real life stuff getting in the way. Anyway, I'm back this week. We'll see how long it takes before I'm off again. I've got my friend here, Aaron Camaro, and I have known him for at least 10 years. Because Aaron and my friend Chris Czynszak are the hosts of the greatest podcast, the Decibel Geek Podcast. And today I'm going to talk to Aaron about pro wrestling.
I love pro wrestling.
Yeah.
I'm your guy. I'm your guy. I always, because we host the Decibel Geek podcast, so everybody's talking to me about rock and roll all the time. But as much as I love rock music, my other passion in life has always been pro wrestling. It's like those are the two art forms in this world that mean the most to me.
Yep. When I started this podcast, I said right from the beginning that I don't want it to just be music. I want it to be everything entertainment. So I'm always looking for, behind the scenes at movies, behind the scenes at TV shows, roadies, behind the scenes at wrestling, anything entertainment, really, because there's so much stuff that to me seems like it's untapped.
Well, I've done some pretty entertaining things over the years, so I'm sure I can keep you entertained for a little while.
Right.
Regale you with the tales.
Yeah, so just to give a little background, besides the Decibel Geek podcast, Aaron has been involved with television, radio, and live events as a host. He was a voice for Crossfire Entertainment. He's done event hosting for several different wrestling organizations. And I do believe he got his start in radio way back in the 1900s.
Yeah, it seems like forever ago. I was just a kid in Wisconsin, a small town, but I don't know. I always felt different than most everybody else. And then, just went through high school, was a skid, listened to rock and roll, smoked weed, drank beer, had fun with my friends. And when you grow up in a small town, you just don't see all the advertisements on TV all the time for colleges and stuff. And I could have gone to college for art. I'm a pretty good artist. I can draw. And I ended up turning it down because I wanted to be in a rock and roll band. But we're in a small town in the middle of Wisconsin. Nobody out of that town was ever going to make it big unless you picked up and moved somewhere. And there were some guys that were probably good enough, but I was never good enough to like pick up and move to LA or something like that. So was just kind of floating through life a little bit and came across a weird opportunity to apply at the radio station and never thought I'd get the job and applied for it mainly to impress my mom to show
Get
her
a
that
haircut and get a real job.
I wouldn't have had to get a haircut working at the radio station. So, I applied and I ended up reading an article about Ozzy Osbourne out of like a Hip Parader magazine or something and listened to the tape. It's like, yeah, it's actually pretty good, and rushed it right back and gave it to them. They listened to it and said, sounds great. When can you start? And I'm like, I can start right now. They're like, well, okay, but we'll ease you into it. And it was just like that. I don't know, man. Growing up in a small town's weird because nobody there has ever gone on to do cool things in entertainment because the opportunities for that stuff just aren't there. And so for me is like, yeah, I'll try it, and end up doing it. So when I moved to Nashville, years later after and being a pretty successful radio DJ up there, one of the most popular rock DJs probably of all time up in the north central Wisconsin area. And to move down to Nashville and then go, I want to be involved in pro wrestling because that was one of the things that made me want to move to Nashville is because when I came down here to visit, my brother would take me to the TNA wrestling shows down at the fairgrounds. And you just never knew who was going to show up. It could be Dusty Rhodes. It could be one of the Road Warriors. It could be Roddy Piper, Hacksaw Jim Duggan. All these guys, just all of a sudden you're seeing them in the ring as a fan, and it's great. And what I realized is in the South, people love and respect pro wrestling a lot more than up north. Up north when I was a kid, I loved pro wrestling, and everybody said that's stupid. It's fake. Why do you like that fake shit? But then I come down to Tennessee, and everybody loves it, and that was a big factor in me moving down here. So then the first thing I tried to do is get a job, doing something. And I used the radio background as my excuse to talk to somebody and be like, hey, I'd really like to be involved in this.
Well, that's pretty cool. And I'm going to kind of jump in here with my own little wrestling story from when I was maybe 5 or 6 years old. I couldn't have been no more than 8 at the time, but we used to watch Memphis wrestling here in Evansville,
Mm.
with Lance Russell and Dave Brown as the hosts.
Oh, yeah.
And we had Jerry Lawler and Bill Dundee and all of those. Well, my favorite wrestler was Plowboy Frazier.
Nice.
So they would come to Evansville, I believe, on Wednesdays, and they would wrestle at the Veterans Memorial Coliseum here in town. And my parents and my grandparents took me to one of those wrestling matches, and we got to meet some of the wrestlers. And when Plowboy Frazier come out, scared the living shit out of me, and everything I had to get away from everybody. I was climbing all over my dad trying to get away. But that is my entire experience with wrestling.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you were terrified from the beginning and never went back.
Well, pretty much.
What about
No,
during like
as a kid, I still watched that wrestling stuff. We had there was a couple of blonde wrestlers that would come out to Billy Squires' "Everybody Wants You." I cannot remember. Man,
the,
somebody's gonna drag me for this. It was like the Golden Boys or
the fabulous ones?
the Fabulous Ones. I believe that's it. I believe that's it. Yeah.
I know my stuff.
Yeah. So anyway, give us all an idea of how you got into wrestling, what you've done with wrestling throughout the years, and what you're doing now.
So, like I said, I'm going to these shows at the fairgrounds, and it's all these big stars. And I'm watching how the ring announcer does it, and he does a good job, and I like him. And I nudged my brother one time, and I go, I'm going to do this someday. I'm going to be in a ring at the fairgrounds with all kinds of people around me. And he's like, yeah, right. And I go, no, I will. I'm going to find a way. So to begin with, there was, besides the big fairgrounds shows, there was all kinds of little independent promotions all around Nashville. And so my wife and I would go to these shows. And one of the shows that I went to was it was at the fairgrounds. A promoter named Burt Prentice was putting it on. And in the main event was Jerry the King Lawler, and he was facing Sid Vicious. And in Sid Vicious's corner was the mouth of the South, Jimmy Hart. And so at intermission, Jimmy Hart's over there signing autographs, meeting fans and stuff. And when the lights go back down, we're actually sitting kind of near that area. When the lights go back down, I hop up and I go over to Jimmy and go, hey, Jimmy, just want to tell you I'm a huge fan. I hated you when I was a kid. You're such a villain. I said, but I'm a huge fan of you. And he's like, oh, thank you. He's so nice. And he says, I say to him, hey, Jimmy, if I ever get a chance to do anything in wrestling, do you think it'd be cool if I call myself the Mouth of the North? And he was like, yeah, sure, baby. God bless. I'm sure he was thinking, yeah, whatever, dude. But he said it. So then what I knew is that following Friday, I actually had a interview / audition for a company called Showtime All-Star Wrestling. And they ran shows out in Millersville, Tennessee. It was just in a small building, but they had some super talented people involved in it and would bring in some, semi big stars from time to time. And it was a pretty cool show. I'd gone out there and checked it out before. And so I go out there and I tell them, I've got a radio background. And they're like, uh-huh. And I go, I can talk. So if there's, any kind of speaking role or anything, I'm not afraid of a camera. I'm not afraid of going live. I'm quick. They're like, yeah, yeah. And they don't seem all that interested. So then I go, oh, yeah, by the way, I was talking to my buddy Jimmy Hart last weekend when he was in town. And he told me that if I wanted to, I could go by the Mouth of the North. And then all of a sudden they seem kind of impressed. But like I said, I knew about wrestling. I mean, I've loved it since I was a little kid. I've studied it. I would read all the magazines. Once the internet became a thing, it was like you could enter a rabbit hole trying to learn all the things that you never knew about wrestling over the years. And so I just, would study and learn and study and try to understand, how it all worked. And so then I knew it's wrestling, you can embellish a little bit and it's kind of expected. So that's what I did. And I ended up with an opportunity to do some ring announcing. And so, like the first night I did it, I was like, okay, because I agreed to do it. But then I thought, oh, I've never done this before, but I've seen it a million times. Every match you've ever watched on TV's got the ring announcer saying, on his way to the ring, hailing from this town, weighing in at these many pounds, it's this guy, and it's like, how hard can it be? So then I just go about doing it. And it turns out pretty good, because I got a good voice and I know how to project and I know what I'm supposed to say. So I go around the locker room, introduce myself and say, hey, what's your name? Write it down. Where are you from? Write that down. What about do you weigh? Write it down and then go, got any cool nicknames or anything you want me to say? And they tell me, I go, okay, cool. And go on to the next and gather up all the information and then go out there and announce them like a real announcer should. And everybody loved it. They asked me, can you come back next time? And I said, yeah, you bet. So then, I worked for that promotion for a while. And then I went to, bounced around some of the other little ones around doing little things here and there. But then I signed up with NWA Main Event, which at the time, the National Wrestling Alliance had territories all over the place. And Nashville's National Wrestling Alliance was called Main Event. And it was run by a guy named Mike Porter. And I got an opportunity to go out there and do a little ring announcing, but also get to do commentary. And that was a lot of fun. So then I'm at NWA Main Event, and a dude from Atlanta or down by Georgia, Cornelia, Georgia, a guy named Bill Behrens comes up. And he was the real deal because he'd worked for WCW and he ran his own very successful independent promotion that was a part of the NWA. And he was involved in the TNA wrestling stuff that I've been seeing at the fairgrounds. And he came up and it was like going to wrestling college. So we're doing commentary. I'm doing a little ring announcing. I'm participating backstage in the filming of the segments and things like that. And I learned a ton from that guy about how you tell the stories, the important things that you got to do to put into place to keep people interested. Because to me, in pro wrestling, the stories are everything. There's so many different aspects involved for a wrestler. You got to be athletic, you got to have some sort of look, you've got to have a character that people can be interested in, whether they love you or they hate you. They got to feel something about you. And then the storylines that you carry out to keep people interested. It is, in a lot of ways, when I talk to people that don't understand wrestling, I explain it as action theater. But you got to understand, like these guys, they have to be actors as well as athletes. So when they're out there in the ring and they're involved in these stories and they're talking to the crowd on the microphone, it's like there's no cut, do it again. There's none of that. It's all live. There's no bringing a stunt man. There's none of that. And it's nonstop. So like even the NFL and NBA and all these big sports leagues have seasons. Pro wrestling never really stops. It's nonstop. It's forever. So, anybody that looks funny at pro wrestling, I mean, they just don't understand, the art form of it. It's so many things. It's action and suspense and drama and comedy and all these forms of entertainment, sports all wrapped into one. That's why I love it so much.
Well,
So,
about the only phrase that you left out of there that seems appropriate to me is soap opera.
in a lot of ways, there's a very soap opera aspect to pro wrestling when it's being done right. So, Currently, I work for a company called CHW who runs wrestling shows out in Ashland City. And what I'm doing for them is writing and then directing the events. So I'm putting everything together. And I know this ain't technically a wrestling podcast. And for you, Al, I'm gonna pull open the curtain and really let you see the entertainment side of how this all gets put together. So you keep the story going, and there is stuff that you borrow from soap operas. For example, the cliffhanger. You always want to have the cliffhanger at the end. How do soap operas end? They build, they build, they build to this moment, and then it cuts off. And the moms at home all go, "Oh, I got to see what happens tomorrow." And of course, they tune back in because the storylines are so dramatic and the characters are strong and everything's written in a way to really grab you and keep you in suspense that you feel like if I miss tomorrow, and in wrestling, if I miss the next event, I'm going to be out of the loop and I'm not going to know what's going on. So you got to create that sense of urgency for people to make sure they come back to the next event, because otherwise, who knows what happens.
Well, when you started writing and directing these episodes or events, however you want to term it, how long did it take you to be able to write good material?
I'm just good at it. I'm just good at it right from the start. I came in and watched a show and saw what I liked and saw what I didn't like, and then talked to the owner and said, "I like this, I like that. This could be done differently. Nobody seems to care about this. We got to figure out a way to make them care about that. Um, there can be storylines built here." And after I was done kind of critiquing the show, Mike Green said, "Yeah, come help us with this if you would." And I said, "Okay, I'd like to help." And so from there, I just looked at who the characters were, what could be done to make the people care about them the most. Because I mean, character building to me is a huge thing. Because if you don't have, it's like a movie or a TV show or anything else, if you don't have characters that are compelling, whether you, like I said, love them and want to see good things happen for them, or if you really dislike the character and want to boo them and jeer them, it's a reaction, and you have to get the reaction out of each character to make the whole thing good. Now, lucky for me, I've got some guys that are super talented in the ring as athletes and also as characters, and can speak well. And some are great off the bat, other ones need work. You film backstage segments and things to be able to keep the storylines going so people tune in between and go, "Okay, this is what happened backstage." So now the next show will make sense to why things go the way they do. Now, there was a time when I worked back for NWA Main Event. The first opportunity I ever got to write the show, Bill Behrens had left, and there was an opening there. And what they had done was put one of the wrestlers in charge, and it went from all these intricate storylines that Bill Behrens was telling to all of a sudden backstage, it's you versus you versus you guys and you guys in a tag team match, and me and my pal in the main event. I was like, what? To go from that to that. So I went to the promoter and I was like, "Look, man, we're already losing fans because the storylines aren't there. And in order to grab people and bring them back, we got to start doing that again. It can't just be stuff that doesn't make any sense from week to week to week." And he said, "Well, who do you think?" And I said, "Well, me." And he's like, "You've never done this before." And I said, "Man, I just went to wrestling college with Bill Behrens. I learned everything I could off of him, and I can do my best to try to replicate the way that he did it." And he's like, "Man, I don't know." I said, "Just give me a chance. If I don't do a good job, I'll go back to commentary or bring announcing or whatever." And he said, "Okay." So then I sat down with the people we had, looked at their characters, saw what would make sense, and started crafting stories for each segment, each match on the show. And we were filming the stuff and doing backstage segments, and I do the Mean Gene Okerlund interviews and all kinds of stuff. And it was amazing. It was really a good time to be able to do that. I had a great crew that were really good. There's all kinds of videos out there with that stuff. But then from there, I had to make a choice of, because I loved writing and I loved producing, but there came an opportunity to work with Crossfire Wrestling, who was running shows down at the fairgrounds, which, back to the very beginning of this, was my original goal, was just to ring announce a show at the fairgrounds one time. And so the way wrestling politics works sometimes is that, like, well, if you go work for them, then you can't work for me, kind of competition around Nashville. And I ended up choosing to go do the shows at the fairgrounds. That's where I get to work with guys like Bret the Hitman Hart and Rowdy Roddy Piper and Mick Foley and just all kinds of guys that I grew up watching on TV, superstars, legendary names in professional wrestling. I got to be in the ring for a Piper's Pit that he performed for the fairgrounds. When Bret the Hitman Hart was there was like 5,000 people packed into that place. It was unbelievable. But then I get to stand in the ring and look around and go, yep, I called it. I said I was going to do this someday, and here I am. So for being from a small town in the middle of Wisconsin, and everybody telling me my whole life, you're never going to get to do stuff like that because up there, nobody ever had. But there I am in the middle of the ring inside of a packed, legendary Tennessee sports arena that was built for pro wrestling, in the middle of the ring in this historic place. And I was like, yep, I knew it. I knew I was going to be able to do this someday. And
Yeah,
so,
as a boy from a small town in Kentucky, I've had very similar experiences. So
yeah,
proud of you, man.
that's like doing the podcasts when you're talking to somebody who you listened to their records when you were a kid, or their CDs or tapes or whatever. Same feeling, I get to talk to people back home and be like, yeah, I just got done interviewing Ace Frehley from Kiss.
I got to hang out backstage with Gene Simmons.
Right?
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, shit, yeah.
So, getting back to the writing and producing the shows, I have kind of a two-part question for you. One, did you ever write an episode that did way, way better than you expected to? And two, did you write an episode that just fell flat and just was terrible? Well, I won't say terrible, but it didn't hit with the audience.
Well, I can tell you one, and this is current. This whole story is going on right now. So each episode leads into the next. So there's a story that goes with it. It starts back when the owner of the promotion, Mike Green, decides, I'm going to sell, or I'm not going to sell, I'm going to give each one of my sons a part of the company. Should something ever happen to me, I want you to carry this on and make sure that the wrestling promotion doesn't die. He does this out in front of the fans. His sons are Steven and Chris, and they are known as the Green Boys. They're Steven and Chris Green, most popular tag team around, and they're sons of the owner. And so he gifts them each partial ownership of the company. The one son, Steven, says, thank you, Dad. If something ever does happen to you, I'd be proud to carry on this legacy. The other one goes, ooh, I got power. And he starts abusing it and doing stuff that's dirty, and turns against his own brother, turns against his dad. His lust for power and ownership overtake his love for his family and his fans. He finds a tag team that are a bunch of dirtbags and uses his power to just give them the tag team titles. They're the champions. They didn't have to beat nobody because the partial owner has gifted them the tag team titles. Nobody likes that. The fans are mad about that. They're mad that their fan favorite babyface guy, as the power's gone to his head and he's abusing it, they're getting pretty mad at him. So then Chris's next goal is to get Steven to either join him or to give him his portion of the company. Steven doesn't want to do that because his brother turned against him. Obviously, I'm not going to give you my portion after all that. And so they start fighting over it. What it comes down to in the very end, and this is months of building this, it comes down to the very end in a moment to where Steven and Chris have a match where we take the contract and we hang it up on a pole. And they got to fight, and whoever climbs that pole and gets the contract down wins. Steven's put his portion on the line against Chris's. So Steven wins, he gives all the power back to his dad where it belongs. If Chris wins, we're all in a lot of trouble because now he's majority owner of the company. So this match goes down to the point where Steven, the good brother, climbs the pole, retrieves the contract, bell rings, fans are happy, everybody's cheering, everybody's having a good time, and then here comes the Wild Wolves, the tag team that were gifted the tag team titles that are in with Chris Green. They come running to the ring with chairs, they attack Steven. Steven's laid out in the ring, they throw the contract down in front of him, they throw down a pen, they say, sign it. They're threatening him with the chairs. He's saying, I'll never sign it. Out comes the dad. The dad comes running out. He gets attacked by Chris's new bodyguard and rolled into the ring. The bodyguard handcuffs the owner of the company, the dad, to the bottom rope, goes around, handcuffs Steven, the good brother, to the bottom rope. They're still in the ring now. They're threatening him with chairs, screaming, sign it, sign it. He's defiant. He won't sign it. And then here comes his 10-year-old son running down to the ring, gets down in front of his dad, lays down in front of his dad, who's handcuffed to the bottom rope, looks up at the brother and says, Uncle, no, don't do this. Now the fans are going ape shit. They're going nuts on the outside of the ring. They lay a chair down in the ring. The Wolves grab the kid. They lay the kid on top of the chair, and they raise the chair like they're going to smash him. Chris goes, wait, stop, don't do this. You think, oh, wow, the evil brother's finally come to his senses. He says, no, give me the chair. He raises the chair above his head. Steven screams, no, stop, I'll sign it. And he signs the contract. At this point, fans are coming over the rails. Security is having to literally stop fans from coming over the rails. I see this from kind of backstage and I go, oh, shoot, they need some help. Let me go out and see if I can lend a hand. First thing I see is this woman and she's coming around the railing and I get in front of her. I go, hey, what are you doing? What are you doing? And she screams, I'm going to kill them MFers. And I go, wait a minute. And I lean in real close and I go, it's wrestling. And she goes, oh, yeah, you're right. I'm sorry. I'm just going to go sit back down. At this point, I get down to the ring and I tell the villains in this situation, get out of here. They got to go backstage. The fans are going absolutely nuts. We get everybody unhandcuffed. The owner gets up yelling and screaming about his grandson and his son and the contract and the power and everything that's happened. And we got to calm everybody back down and everybody leaves. And there's people there that are pissed. They're pissed off. And so we got to get Chris out of the building. We throw a towel over his head, send 2 security guards out with him to his car. They get him out to the parking lot now and down the road before they can come back in. To me, that's pro wrestling. That's the way it's supposed to be done. That those fans got so caught up in the moment and were so, it was so dramatic that they couldn't help themselves. They forgot that wrestling is a performance at the end of the day. But when you're doing it really, really well, that's the sort of reaction you can hope for. Did a thing one time for NWA main event. I love brothers. The brother thing always works. This is another one. Had two brothers, uh, Larry Cooter and Sean Fatal. Man, see, it's been a long time, but they were brothers. One was a heel, one was a babyface. They were each doing their own thing. They never really crossed paths with each other. We never really acknowledged that they were brothers, but the fans all knew. But we never really acknowledged it. They were just always doing their own thing until through circumstance, they get brought together. And the older brother is jealous and he's mean, and he's beating up his little brother all the time. And this is a story that starts at around Thanksgiving and ends at around Christmas time. So we go through this whole thing for a couple of months where these brothers are button heads, button heads, button heads. But when the story was originally written, I always looked at where do I want it to go and how do we get there? So a lot of times back then, what I would do is I'd have a notebook and I'd flip ahead how pages, how many ever shows it was, and write out what that card was going to be. And then for each storyline involved, go back and go, how do we get there? But this whole thing was built on a show that was happening on Christmas Eve, I believe it was that year. So right at Christmas time. And the whole thing was built to get to the brothers, go to shake his hand. He don't shake his hand. He wants a hug. And I knew that the audience would go, aw. And it was Christmas time. And so we spent months building to a hug. And it went exactly the way it was supposed to go. So those are a couple of good ones that I've written. Man, there's so many. I'm involved in some stuff right now that's pretty intense. We got a thing going on right now where a guy's son has kind of been kidnapped and maybe possessed by a demon. Anything is possible in the world of pro wrestling. Everyone, we're gonna have to wait and see how that one plays out. But
Hey, man, like I said, that's a soap opera. How many times
yeah,
can somebody get their head cut off and come back to life?
yeah, I got the Kentucky Iceman. You'd be a big fan of him. The Kentucky Iceman versus the Tennessee Badass had been a thing for a while. And of course, everybody loves the Tennessee Badass and everybody hates the Kentucky Iceman because the shows are here in Tennessee. And we got a good several months out of that where it would go back and forth until it finally came to a loser leaves CHW flag match. And in the end, it was the Kentucky Iceman waving that Commonwealth and securing the victory and kicking the Tennessee Badass right out of the promotion.
I'm
So
surprised
there's
they didn't tear down your building.
yeah, I know. But up north from here, the Kentucky Iceman is considered to be a state treasure, I'm sure.
Probably so. And I have to admit that the story about the brothers and the grandson and the dad and all that was a pretty good story. And
Yeah,
I'll be honest, I sit here, I felt my blood pressure going up a little
yeah,
bit. So that's
yeah.
good. That's good entertainment right there.
It was intense. It was one of the most intense things I've ever been involved with. I'll tell you another good one I got going on right now. Here, this is some good behind. I don't know if I'm going to share this with the wrestling people around here. I think we'll keep this one to the rock and rollers that also like wrestling. So I had a guy named Snyder, and his thing was he was a nerd, and he carried around one of those Fugler stuffed animals like it was his buddy, and his whole gimmick was kind of created to be somebody that the little kids would like. But when he came to me and we started working together, he told me that he'd like to change what he's doing. So I get talking to him and I said, well, what do you got in mind? And he says, I've always been a big fan of the Gold Dust character. Alan, are you familiar with Gold Dust?
I am not.
Okay, so Gold Dust was a guy that acted very effeminate and kind of strange, and he wore makeup, and he was just a very far out character, very controversial at the time because he was androgynous, I guess would be the best word to describe him. And people would scream homophobic slurs at him and stuff. And this was back in the 90s. So to try to do something like that now is even harder to navigate than when it was back then. So we get talking about it, and I said, this is a complicated character. If for you to be androgynous, you can never say what you are. You can never, you know, act a way that gives people the answer. Is he or isn't he? What is he? And let them wonder about what you are. And so we decided to do it and give it a try. And it went too good. It went too good. So one of the things that we talked about was, not wanting to offend anybody with a character like that. And I was thinking, of gay people or people of that persuasion, that we didn't want to be stereotypical or lazy with the way the character was presented. And so we really put a lot of time and thought into it. And when it debuted, it got a reaction, a pretty wild reaction. So after it's done, I'm listening to the crowd, and I can hear them just hating him, hating him. And I go, that's a strong reaction. And I wasn't sure what it was going to be. I didn't know if they'd like him or if they'd hate him. But being that it's kind of a, I guess, rural-ish community that we're in, they didn't take to that character at all. And some of them were pretty upset. And when he came backstage, I congratulated him for getting such a, strong reaction out there. And then one of the security guards said to me, "Hey, people out here are pissed. Some of them are threatening to leave." And I said, "What?" And he goes, "Yeah, that whole group of people are threatening to leave." And so I go out and I go, "Hey, what's going on here?" And they're like, we don't like that, and what it turned out to be was they were very conservative people. So while I was worried about this side of the spectrum, I hadn't considered the opposite side of that, and had to calm them down and tell them, "Hey, don't leave. We still got big title matches coming up, tonight. You don't want to miss none of that." Got them all calm back down, got them back in their seats, and then caught them at the end of the show. And I said, "Did you end up having a good time?" And they said, "Yes, these last matches were amazing, but we didn't like that other thing, because, we fight hard to keep that kind of stuff out of our schools." And I go, yeah, I get it. I get it, and I apologize, and we'll figure it out, and they were okay with it, and they were cool after that. But that was an experiment that, I don't want to say it went wrong. It just went too good.
You didn't get the reaction you were hoping for.
Yeah, no, I mean, I wanted a strong reaction, and I got that, but I didn't want to make people want to leave the show. But in my opinion, and it's just my opinion, I think they got caught up in the moment and reacted way stronger than they should have, because it wasn't all that offensive. And I don't know. We had to tweak the character, make him more split personality, where he's in the ring, he's more evil and vicious, more vicious than evil. But he still has moments of kind of doing sort of feminine things too. So, these things happen. Not everything's a home run. Sometimes you got to tweak things, sometimes you got to change things. Um, I'd say the trickiest thing about writing a wrestling show is the moving parts, because I could plan till next year, but things change. Nobody's under contract. Um, Things run their course sometimes, and you find yourself pivoting a lot. So, for example, like I had a guy that he was being kind of difficult a little bit, I'd say, but we had written all these great storylines for him, and it would come day of the show, and he'd be like, "Oh, I hurt myself. I don't know if I'm going to be able to make it." And I'd be like, "What? You know, you're such a huge integral part of this whole storyline that, you know, you told us you loved, and we're building all this. If you don't show up, it's going to mess everything up." And he goes, "Yeah, okay." And I got to talk him into coming. And then it's the next time it's, "Well, I want to do this, I want to do that." And it's like the things you're wanting to do don't make sense to the storyline that we're trying to push forward. And he's not the only one involved. Like there's several people involved. And then he wants to be there and then he don't want to be there. And it's like, how can I build a storyline around so many uncertainties? So you spend all this time writing it out, going, this is exactly the way I want it to go. This is the way it's going to get the best reaction. It'll be look the best on the episode when it's recorded and comes out, and it'll continue to make sense. Because if your stuff stops making sense, then people are going to lose interest in it really fast. Everything's got to make sense. And so that's the trickiest part, is all the moving parts. When you're not WWE or AEW and you got people under contract and they are obligated to be there, the best thing you can do is provide excellent storylines for the wrestlers themselves, because they go to a lot of shows where, like I said, it's you versus you, blah, 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 and they get bored. You know, and we're all involved in pro wrestling, just like musicians, you get involved because you love it. And so when it stops being fun, that's a problem. You know, if you got something you're passionate about and it's not fun, then that's a problem. But when you have storylines and character situations that as a performer you can really sink your teeth into, that's what makes wrestlers happy. So if the wrestlers are happy and the fans are happy, then that means the owners are happy. That means I'm happy and I'm having fun doing it. And so it's worth it. You know, it's worth it, all the headaches and all the hassle that goes along with it and all the last minute changes that need to be made. And, you know, where's so and so? Oh, they couldn't make it. What? You know? And it's live and it's all live. You can't go, well, let's just, you know, film this and then we'll film him next time. I mean, it's live. The show's got to go. You only got one take on the whole thing.
So if I wanted to come and see some of these matches, where, what day, and what time?
I would say probably the best thing to do would be to follow CHW on Facebook. It's CHW Pro Wrestling. Like I said, they're in Ashland City. We've been working with the Armory out there, so we got this big, beautiful building. For an independent show, we're doing pretty good. We started out, the first couple of shows were probably about 150 people, and then it crept up to 200, and then we had got close to 300, and then we had two shows in a row that had 400 people at it. And then the next show after that, we had tornadoes that night, and so about 200 showed up. The next one was about 250. We reunited the Naturals, who are a legendary tag team from this area, and built the crowd back up to about 300 again. So, I mean, for an independent show, that's pretty damn good.
Yeah, that sounds like I'm going to have to make a trip down there. What day of the week does that happen?
Saturday nights, once a month.
Saturday nights, once a month. Wow.
The next one we got coming up is a show. We're calling it Stairway to Hell. It's on June 21st, and we are calling it that because the main event is a big old heavyweight championship ladder match between two of the best wrestlers in the entire area. The champion, Austin Wright, putting his title on the line against Colton Cage. That's going to be pretty awesome. We fired, you know what, talking about how the storyline progresses, just a couple of weekends ago, Chris Green put his hands on one of the owner's special appointed guest general managers, and that's against the contract, and he just got fired. So
Dang.
this next show is going to be a huge celebration because we're out from underneath the tyrannical thumb of Chris Green. He's gone. We're going to see what the future looks like without Chris Green bullying us all the time. So I'm excited about that.
Got to find some different drama now.
Oh, there's plenty of it. The Kentucky Iceman just won the Ashland City Championship. So he's got a big celebration planned where I'm sure he's going to rub it in everybody's faces that the guy from Kentucky is the champion of Ashland City. That's gonna, that's going to be great. He's a real Kentucky supremacist, that guy.
Right on. All right, so CHW stands for Championship Honor Wrestling,
Yes.
and it's CHW Pro Wrestling on Facebook, correct?
Best place to do it. We put our episodes out on Championship Productions on YouTube. Just type in CHW Ashland City Rumble or even CHW Rumble in your search bar on YouTube. It'll bring it up, and then you subscribe to it from there. Trying to build up subscribers on there. We're putting together some pretty cool TV shows because, well, internet TV shows, I guess, because the storylines all fall into place on these episodes, and we're doing a lot of fun stuff. We're having a good time doing it.
Right on. Well, I won't keep you. You got a busy day. I have a busy day. I will talk to you soon. Appreciate your time.
This has been way more fun than editing a podcast, I'll tell you that. And I mean, honestly, that all just kind of scratches the surface of everything I've done in wrestling, but I'd love to come on and just chat with you again anytime.
Oh, it will make it happen in the future.
Awesome. Thank you, brother.
All right. See you later. Thanks for listening to Big Al's Rockin' Podcast. If you haven't done so already, please be sure to subscribe on your preferred podcast outlet. Visit BigAlRocks.com to find past episodes, on-demand links to my radio show, links to my social media, and other Big Al shenanigans. Most importantly, please like and share this episode. Peace out.